Happy to have you along as always. We are joined by Greg Engert, beer director for the Neighborhood Restaurant Group, a James Beard Award nominee. The group includes Rustico, 2 locations in Alexandria and Ballston, also Eat Bar in Arlington. Greg, it is always good to see you. What is on tap this week?
Well, this week I thought it was a good time to talk about a beer that I think many people have seen in the DC area recently, only on tap. It's not coming down in bottles at all right now. And it's from Oxbow Brewing Company, a very young brewery, about 1.5 years old, from Newcastle, Maine, so about an hour north of Portland. Obviously Maine just keeps sending us better and better beer all the time. Allagash is the mainstay, and then we've talked about Maine Beer Company, which is actually located in the same industrial park as Allagash in Portland. And then we have this beautiful literal farmhouse brewery located in Newcastle called Oxbow. And this is their flagship beer. It's called FPA, which stands for Farmhouse Pale Ale. And here at Church Key and Birch Barley, we are one of the accounts that consistently pours this beer on draft. It is a fantastic beer. And what's really special about Oxbow beers is that they're making teeny tiny amounts of beer up in Maine right now. I mean, it is a small farm where they refurbished a farm and put a brew house in it, farm brewery that distributes in Maine and New England. And then outside of that very local area, the only place you'll find it is in our area. For reasons I'll get to in a second, but we might as well taste it.
Why wait? Now that has more of a, well, because it's a farmhouse pale ale, is that why it has more of a Belgian sort of taste influence?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So Tim Adams is the co-founder and brewmaster of Oxbow. His partner Jeff Maslin is another of the founders and owners. And this is a brewery that's located in a farm, but it is a farmhouse brewery generally speaking, in that they utilize farmhouse ale yeast, typically seen to brew saisons in Belgium, and now all over the world, of course. But this particular yeast will give you that typical kind of Belgian yeasty quality, a little bit of fruit. It's kind of stone fruity, very floral, grassy, and peppery qualities. But they call themselves an American farmhouse brewing company in that they are utilizing American hops in some of the beers, including this one. That's why it's got a little bit more of an intense bitterness on the palate. It's not necessarily like a hoppy pale ale, but it's drier than some Belgians. And they're also looking for more assertive and aggressive flavors. I think that has that.
This would seem to me to be a great introduction to this style of beer if you're, some people a little put off by that sort of style.
And I think there's something here for people who like bitterness too. I mean, a lot of Belgian beers are still typically a little bit on the sweeter side. And so people who like hops don't gravitate towards them. But there is a growing movement of brewers who are bringing hop bitterness back to Belgian beer. And I think that Tim at Oxbow is definitely doing that. And of course, we've talked about Yvonne de Batz at De La Seine from Belgium, Durank in Belgium. These are Belgian and American brewers that are insisting that bitterness can play a part in the flavor profiles of Belgian ales.
Every time we do a new beer or a new brewery from Maine, I'm excited because I love Maine. It reminds me of Washington State, where I'm from. I've been there only twice. But what better to do on a cold Maine winter's day than hole up in the farmhouse and make beer?
And actually, that's a great point because, like I said, they're very limited down here and they're mostly only on draft. So even when it's a great place to visit. I mean, visiting breweries has become a pretty big tourist thing, and it's so much fun, as you know. But especially when you get up there, I mean, this is a farm kind of in the middle of nowhere, to the point where like GPS seems to get people lost all the time. But by the time you get there, they do growler hours there on the weekends, and it's a beautiful bucolic place with this farm that's producing world-class American takes on Belgian classics. And I should also mention that the reason why we see this beer in this area, the only kind of outpost outside of the local market in Maine and New England, is because Tim Adams, who's been a friend of mine for years, was down in D.C. for many years before he moved to Maine to do the brewery in 2011 as a local rep for Peak Organic Brewing. And he was also a very prominent home brewer around these parts, making great beers. So there's a special place in his heart for the DC area, and so he makes sure to send some of his beer down for us.
What would you pair this with? It seems incredibly versatile.
It
from
is
cheese
hugely
into...
versatile. You can do a lot of stuff with it, and that's one of the things, you know, no matter how obvious it may seem to some, Belgian-style beers with the beautiful aromatic qualities of spice and fruit, as well as milder bitterness for the most part, are excellent with so many foods. I mean, Belgian beers really are. Belgian styles of beer are the best for food pairing. So yes, you can do so much with this. I mean, I think about cured meats and bacon with that salty quality versus the pepper here. You've got the fruity notes throughout. You've got goat's milk cheeses that are tangy. Even wash rind cheeses like Grayson, which is local, that's kind of funky, would go really nicely with this. The sky really is the limit. It goes awesome with salads even. Not going to bring too much bitterness into it. It's great with a lot of different things.
And this brewery, do you anticipate us seeing more of it down here? Do they bottle beer?
Well, yes. So they're pretty much draft only right now. The things that they are bottling, and we actually are lucky enough to have some bottles of these right now, are their barrel-aged beers. And they do their barrel-aged beers in super small amounts, like 400 bottles a run, and that's it. So we actually currently have bottles of the barrel-aged Oxbow Farmhouse Pale Ale. So this beer, but that's been barrel-aged in bourbon barrels. Jim Beam on this go-around. This is the fourth batch he's done. Aged in bourbon barrels with Brettanomyces, a semi-wild yeast added, so it's even funkier. And we have some 750s of that. But for the most part, you're seeing it just on draft. And, you know, I love this brewery, and I have for a long time. And they are slowly growing so that you'll see more and more of their beer. And I think eventually you'll see them bottling more stuff. But, you know, our relationship with them even goes back further because one of the collaboration beers, that Blue Jacket, the brewery that I'm opening in the spring of this year, I guess now.
Been talking about it for a while.
Yeah,
it's getting close.
It's going to happen. We actually just started getting our fermentation tanks and our hot and cold liquor tanks arrived at the site where the mezzanines are all being built. But anyways, we did a collaboration beer called Freestyle with Oxbow way back when, and we actually served that beer at Snallygaster, the big beer event that we did for Neighborhood Restaurant Group. So I love the beers, and I hope that we get to continue to collaborate with Tim and Oxbow in the future.
Is there a point that a brewery has to sort of stop and make a decision? I don't know how much beer they exactly produce a year, but is there a point where a brewery has to say, we're going to hold the line right here, or we've got to really go for it and expand,
Yeah.
or are there any really limits or parameters on that?
There are. I mean, it's what every single production brewery will experience as they grow, because this is a small brew house. I mean, I think the brewery, they're only doing like maybe 1,200 barrels a year, which is roughly 2,400 regular-sized kegs a year, which is minuscule. It's about what a brew pub would produce to serve on site. So very small. And you do get to that point. I mean, you can always brew more in your system, in your mash tun, in your kettle, using your whirlpool if you have one. But what you really need are fermenters and bright tanks to fill with beer. So typically breweries will open where they are, and then they'll add more fermenters because they can always brew on the same system, brew more beer there. They need a place to put it. So DC Brow just did that, and they'll push past 6,000 barrels because they just got 6 more fermenters in. So you see that. And then eventually you hit a point where you just physically can't brew enough beer on that size system anymore. So you have to invest in a newer brew house, which will give you the ability to brew larger batches of beer into larger fermenters, and it just kind of keeps building. So inevitably, it's a kind of a constant reinvestment.
And any brewer who believes in the quality of their beer, I'm sure, is loath to, in any way, risk the quality. I mean, that must be a huge...
It's supposed to be. It should be. And I think that the beers that we talk about every week, for sure, that is what's happening with that. Because, you're right. I mean, one of the big things about quality is the amount of tank time a beer gets. Because obviously the fastest and best way, most efficient way to be profitable is to make something and sell it. Right? I mean, make it, sell it, never sit on inventory. But these brews require conditioning. They require typically a little bit of length of fermentation. But then once fermentation is complete, ales and lagers alike require conditioning times where all flavors will will be reabsorbed by yeast or will blow off as volatile compounds, or when the bigger flavors will kind of integrate into one another and the beers become better flavored and more delicious over time. And so that is an investment. You have to wait on your beer, and that's what inhibits how much beer any brewer who's careful about quality and cares about flavor can make.
I can make a mean birdhouse out of a plastic bleach bottle.
Yeah, exactly.
I could be selling them tomorrow.
Exactly.
If you've got a question that has nothing to do with beer, if you have a question for Greg, please let us know. The email is beeroftheweek@WTOP.com. Greg, thank you as always.
Thank you.
Everyone, please do always drink responsibly, and be sure to bring your thirst next time for another Beer of the Week.